What is good, YouTube? It is your boy Flexx. So in this video, man, we're gonna be reacting to Lee Duffy, a 2021 documentary. I skimmed through it a little bit, man. It looks like it was made in 1998, but hopefully this one suffices, man. If it's not the right one, because there's always that one guy in my comments like, this is the worst video you could react to. Well, do me a favor, post the correct one in the comments, or better yet, join the Reddit page and post the videos there. All right, so let's cut out all the chit chat, man. Let's go ahead and get right into the video. Grab your headphones, turn the volume up, get that full experience. YouTube viewers watching, let's go.
To this day, 30 years on, people are still talking about the legend of Lee Duffy. Lee lived an exhilarating life full of incredible stories that still divide opinions. I've asked around a few pals who knew Lee, done some reading up, so I'll get straight into it and I hope I can do his story some justice. Now into Lee Duffy's background. Born in 1965, Lee grew up in the South Bank and Eston areas of Teesside. Although Lee would go on to be known as a formidable force, he didn't start out like that. As a child, it's well known Lee was badly bullied, and it's said by many he had quite a shy and timid nature back then. Adults would see a young Lee wandering the streets, and it's said he didn't like being at home with his dad, Laurie Sr., who was reportedly a violent and abusive drunk. Quite often, there'd be scenes of Laurie Sr. beating his mother at home, and at once he even threw Lee's mother out of her bedroom window, breaking several bones. When wandering the streets, Lee would be a target for all the bullies in his surrounding area of Eston and South Bank, being beaten up and tormented horrifically by 16, 17, 18 and even 19-year-old bullies when he was under 12 years old. They'd call him Sniffer because he couldn't breathe out of his nose and breathed out of his mouth, but when Lee hit puberty, he started to turn the tables, and many say at times he could be the bully himself. At 14, Lee did his first stint in Borstal and was supposed to be the toughest and most feared youth in there. At 15, when he got out, his mother sent him to move in with his uncle Rod Jones, who lived in Hemlington, because he was getting in too much trouble in his local area of South Bank. Lee idolised his uncle Rod, who was a bit of a maverick, former Cat A prisoner, and had been in a lot of street fights. Lee had already done boxing training as a young child, getting taken along by his father to toughen him up, and although he lacked the discipline to ever compete, coaches often remarked about his natural ability. What his uncle Rod taught him, however, was some of the subtleties of the art of street fighting. Tell him how to approach fights with his hands by his waist and throwing punches from the hip, so people couldn't see the first punch coming, and that's usually all it took with Lee. Despite his move, Lee couldn't keep out of trouble, and in his late teens he went on the warpath to even the score with every bully who ever gave him a hard time as a child. By the time Lee...
And that's typically how it goes down, you know. You're subjected to this treatment for so long, and then when you're finally able to, you know, defend yourself and be able to stand up for yourself, you know, this is what happens. And, you know, you hold in all that aggression and that resentment from all those years past, you know what I mean? Finally, when you're able to do such things, it comes out as a storm, you know? So I've been through that as a young man, you know, and I can sympathize with that. You know, that's something I can sympathize with.
He was 18, definitely. He had a big name with all the youths on South Bank, but he established himself with everyone else when he took...
Ooh. Ooh. My man got a forehead on him, boy. Oh my God, bro. I don't know if any of you guys know who Beavis and Butthead is, bro. But look it up. This is definitely Butthead, I believe. Yeah. Look it up.
Beavis and Butthead. The hardest bouncer in the area, John Teasdale. John Teasdale ran a lot of the local doors in the town and challenged Lee for being this young'un who he's heard a lot about, starting loads of fights. Lee
Okay, that was very rude of me. That's probably what was going on when he was a kid, right? The exact stuff I literally just said was probably said to him as a child. Sorry.
Knocked him out and broke his jaw outside the Jovial Monk pub in North Hornsby and made short work of it. After this, even seasoned hardmen knew about Lee Duffy and were wary of him. Lee Duffy also did his first stint in an adult prison for a robbery at the Dragonara Hotel in November 1983 when he was 18 years old. One of Lee's first criminal enterprises was taxing clients of a female friend of his who was a prostitute. The two of these would do this together. She would lure clients to a secluded place where Lee would rob them, and most didn't want to go to the police because of the embarrassment of it all. Lee trained intensely while in prison and bulked up into a strong and lean frame of about 14.5 stone. Apparently while inside, Lee would be regarded as the governor by other inmates and take cigarettes from them at his leisure. Even the prison screw...
Can somebody tell me how much a stone weighs in pounds? Please.
...showed him respect. Lee completed his first prison stint in 1985 and he was straight back out on the nightclub scene. Lee moonlighted as a doorman himself, working for his old rival Jonker Teasdale at a few different venues, one of the main ones being the now demolished Havana Club in Middlesbrough. He'd also hang out there a lot with friends like Lee Harrison, Pitchhead. The two would drive around in an open-top car blasting Lee's favourite song, The Hole of the Moon. It's said he looked up to one of his older colleagues by the name of Kevin Ducklin, and the two would have bets over who could knock the most people out. Although there's no footage of Lee Duffy, he used to MC, and there are recordings of him performing at the Havana nightclub in Middlesbrough where he taunts Viv Graham.
You know what's funny about that game that he just mentioned is that that's actually something that's kind of been around for a while, man. My uncles used to tell me stories when they would, get drunk, go out to the clubs, and they would play a game called Spot 'em Got 'em, right? So pretty much is you spot somebody out, and then you go try to knock them out. Spot 'em Got 'em. It's crazy.
Who's the odd fella from Newcastle? Who's the odd fella? Hold on. With the good scream in the house. With the good scream in the house.
Perhaps motivated by the mental scars and insecurities due to the violent bullying he suffered as a child, Lee was on a warpath to prove he was the hardest man around. Lee would get taxis to different towns like Newcastle, Sunderland, Manchester and Liverpool, walk up to doormen and tell them my name's Lee Duffy before knocking them unconscious to enhance his reputation. He would also normally only wear shorts and a t-shirt when out clubbing, and doormen who tried to refuse him entry would end up getting hit and attacked. His feud with Viv Graham started when he was out with Stephen Sears in Newcastle upon Tyne. Lee and Stephen were accompanied with friends when refused entry from Macy's nightclub, which today is called Cosy Joe's. The doorman at this venue worked for Viv Graham. It's said Lee then began to set about the doorman, knocking more than 6 of them out single-handedly and telling them all he wanted a fight with Viv Graham. Stephen Sears was trying to arrange a fight between the two, but the day after, Viv went down to Stephen's father John's house to tell them he wanted no parts. John then rang them with Viv there, but Lee said on the phone he was having none of it, and when he saw Viv it was on. The two did meet on one occasion when Viv was serving time in prison for an attack on Stuart Watson in Hobo's nightclub, with different accounts of what happened between the two, but I'll touch on that deeper in a different video. Another notable fight I heard Lee had was with Jeff Horton in Stockton. For those who don't know, Jeff Horton was a judo and vale-tudo champion who used to run a lot of doors. I'm told when Jeff was 14 he went out to live in Japan and gained serious respect on the martial arts scene out there. When Lee was working himself in a bar at Stockton, Jeff got him in a tight grip and began walking him out of the bar, with Lee unable to move. Once out, Lee gave off the impression he was willing to walk away, so then Jeff released him and got sucker punched. One version has it Lee followed it up and knocked him out, but I'm told another version is Jeff sucked it up and gave him one back, and the two had a standoff before Lee walked away.
That sounds more. Oh, big guy. Okay. That sounds more reasonable. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this guy's just gonna get knocked out. You know, it just doesn't sound like somebody who's just gonna be knocked out. You know, but you could with a sucker punch. Anybody can get knocked out with a sucker punch. But that's on some sucker stuff, you know?
Lee received another prison sentence for an attack on Peter Wilson, seen here in this photo. It said Peter Wilson himself was a respectable kickboxer and was working as a bouncer at the venue when Lee Duffy sucker punched him. The blow was so forceful that the whiplash from it actually broke Peter Wilson's neck. Another prison sentence Lee received was for attacking two Leeds United fans when they were in town to support the club as they were playing Middlesbrough. One of the men Lee knocked out lost an eye. When back in prison this time, Lee put in some intense workouts and gained some serious size. Although Lee wasn't a Cat A prisoner, he was treated as though he was one because he was so hard to handle. Lee was moved up and down the country to various different prisons because of his behaviour, forming friendships with several other notorious hard men. One is said to have been Paddy Conroy. Another man Lee befriended was Charles Salvador, formerly known as Charles Bronson. The two used to beat up child abusers inside and apparently got on well and got a hold of one child abuser together once. One prisoner Lee had a massive grudge with, however, was the infamous Paul Sykes. Sykes was a successful boxer who fought for the Commonwealth title as a pro and a feared hardman in his own right. Lee Duffy hated him, however, and even more so because of the stories about Sykes sexually abusing young prisoners. Apparently the screws kept these two apart inside. When out for the final time, Lee Duffy was now a man on a mission, more so than ever, to make a name for himself. He had a fight with hardman Brian Cockrell. Lee hit Brian, almost knocking him unconscious. Then Brian grabbed a hold of him while dazed. Some say it went on until the two men called it a draw because they were gassed out, but Brian says he pushed on until Lee quit and Brian came out on top. Brian Cockrell and Lee Duffy then joined forces, taxing drug dealers together. A friend of mine met Lee Duffy around this time. He told me that a mutual friend had put Lee onto him as Lee was after purchasing a large amount of steroids. When he pulled up to the meeting place on his motorbike in South Bank with some rough-looking youths looking over, when Lee Duffy walked across, he was half expecting Lee to attack him and steal the steroids, but Lee gave him the money and trained with him a few times at Steel City Gym after that. Lee's constant violent altercations were starting to build him a long list of enemies at this point, however. 3 attempts were made on Lee's life. One was a hit ordered by a woman who tried to call it off at the last minute but couldn't get in touch with the hitman. It was a dark night and the gunman had bad eyesight, however, and missed Lee Duffy with his shot.
Hey. You need to find a new job, buddy. Assassination's not for you.
Another attempt on Lee Duffy's life was made on January the 31st, 1991, when gunmen from Birmingham came into a blues party looking for Lee. The gunmen had been all over, but it took them a while to find him, as Lee rarely stayed at the same house 2 nights in a row, as he was often out partying. While Lee was escaping, the gunmen almost managed to get a shot at point blank range, but Lee was able to grab the gun and shove it down. The shot that went off blew away a chunk of Lee's foot. Lee then jumped backwards onto a taxi and flipped over it before running away up Newport Road before hiding in the doorway of Rooney's nightclub, which is today called Sapphires, until he was found the following day by police. The gunmen fled in a different direction. After this attack, Lee walked with a limp. The final unsuccessful attempt on Lee's life was on April the 28th in 1991 at the commercial pub in South Bank. David Tappan threw petrol over Lee and tried to set him alight. On this occasion it was raining heavily outside and the matches David Tappan used wouldn't light. Lee ran out the pub and took his clothes off, which were doused in petrol, then ran back in the bar and gave Tappan a beating, breaking his jaw. Believe it or not, Lee Duffy was actually remanded for this assault, and when put in prison was inside with the same people who shot him in the foot, who were on remand for that attempt on his life. On August the 25th, 1991, on Martin Road, Middlesbrough, outside the Afro-Caribbean Centre, a fight broke out between Lee Duffy and one of his old rivals called David Allison, who was known locally as Allo. The two had a few fights before, with Lee coming out on top, but Allo still wouldn't back down to Lee. Lee was supposed to be giving Allo a right pasting, getting on top of him and smashing his head against the pavement, letting him get back up and knocking him back down. Then a friend of Allo's called Lee King allegedly passed him a knife, and a well-placed stab by Allo right in Lee's armpit hit a main artery. Apparently Lee instantly gasped out, "You've killed me, Allo," with blood spraying all over the place so violently that you could hear the gushing of it hitting the pavement. Some say you could actually even smell the blood in the air, it was so abundant. Then Lee, quickly fading from consciousness, tried to make it to a taxi. Most refused him because he had a history of being funny with some taxi drivers and skipping fares. After around 20 minutes, after many had turned him away, one finally picked him up. Ironically, this too was a taxi driver Lee had previously skipped fare on. After trying to get him to hospital, it's believed Lee died in the taxi, aged just 26. On the night of the stabbing, many of Lee's friends were phoned and told of the news, but most thought little of it because he'd survived all the previous attempts on his life. A lot of people celebrated Lee's death, but many also mourned it. It was headline news in the northeast of England. On a side note, I know a bouncer who was part of a team that were all given a £25 an hour contract on the condition that they kept Lee Duffy out of a venue. Pen was put to paper 1 week before his death and they never had to deal with him. Here's how the local news reported his funeral.
A 26-year-old former boxer and nightclub bouncer was stabbed to death 2 weeks ago. Friends from Tyneside joined mourners on Teesside for one of the biggest funerals seen in his hometown of Southbank.
More than 1,000 people lined the road outside St John's Church in Southbank as the funeral procession arrived. His family and girlfriend Lisa led 300 mourners packed into the church where he was christened a quarter of a century ago. He became a legend in the underworld among his friends and enemies. He'd refused police protection 3 times after alleged attempts on his life since last Christmas. He was stabbed to death in a fight 2 weeks ago after an illegal drinks party in Middlesbrough. Although only 26, he had 14 convictions involving violence. Detectives leading the inquiry into his death were among the families who waited silently outside as the funeral procession left the church for a burial service at Eston Cemetery a mile away. More than 1,000 people surrounded the graveside as his family and closest friends said their last farewells. Some of the floral tributes were a reminder of his amateur boxing days. His mother carried with her a letter written during his last jail sentence, a 4-year term for assault and affray. From his cell in Liverpool jail, he wrote, "What a wonderful mother you were, and about the good times we had when you took us to the seaside or into the country. Those were the days, not a care in the world, just happy times. Then I grew up and discovered the big bad world out there." Tonight, a family friend said although he'd be remembered as a hard man, he was a loving man.
This wasn't the end of the story. There was still the matter of the murder trial for David Allison, who stabbed Lee Duffy on that fateful night on August the 25th, 1991. His defence team argued successfully that due to Lee Duffy's violent nature and history of pulling guns out in nightclubs, that Allo acted in fear for his life when he stabbed Lee. Here's how that was reported.
murder, saying he had acted in self-defense.
I'm absolutely delighted at the verdict. David Allison was always an innocent man. He had to fight for his life in August 1991. He had to speak for his life in that trial, and I'm just glad that the jury have given him his life back again.
He stabbed Lee Duffy on August the 25th in 1991 after a blues party at the Afro-Caribbean Centre in Middlesbrough. A fight broke out between the pair, and the court heard it was obvious that Mr. Allison was losing. It was then he was passed the knife which killed Lee Duffy. After 2 hours of deliberations, the jury returned its verdict. There were cheers from the public gallery and outside the court. But the family of Lee Duffy, sitting in the back row, said they didn't believe justice had been done.
It's disgusting. It's another case, but I'm afraid there's no justice, is there? For our two much Lee's passed up and not his past. The only consolation is my son would have wanted it this way. Lee would not have sent that man to jail. Just had something to keep me going.
Why would Lee have wanted it this way?
Because Lee wasn't a man who would have took anyone to court.
Also appearing with Mr. Allison were Richard Neal, who was found not guilty of perverting the course of justice and possessing an offensive weapon, and Lee King, who was found not guilty of attempting to impede the apprehension of an offender, but guilty of perverting the course of justice.
So there you have it, the story of Lee Duffy. I'd like to add that although there's a lot of incidents of violence and bullying mentioned, people who knew Lee speak fondly of him and how far he'd go out of his way to help those he loved. They don't make them like Lee Duffy anymore, and he had to be tough to survive his very violent childhood. 30 years on to this day, his grave has been destroyed 3 times by vandals, and he's still being talked about.
Okay, I guess that was the end of the video. That's crazy. But you guys, if you've watched any of my videos before, you guys know that there is a trend, right? There's always a trend as far as like how they're brought up, right? And the path they decide to take when they get older, right? And with Lee Duffy, unfortunately, he had a big head, right? I'm pretty sure that's what was getting him made fun of, is that big old forehead, right? If he didn't have the big forehead, he probably wouldn't have got made fun of it as much, right? And that drove him to, do these things obviously you're not supposed to do, and when you live a life of violence, 9 times out of 10 your life will probably end with violence, so it's like it's hard, man. But what's really crazy to me is how some of these people can be celebrated after they died by so many people, knowing what they do, what they have done, but yet they're still celebrated in such a fashion, which is mind-blowing to me. I know everybody is loved by someone. Everybody, no matter who you are, what you do, and somebody's always there to love you. You know what I mean? But the fact that these crowds be so massive to some of these people, when we know, like, morally they shouldn't be celebrated as such, they still are. It's crazy, It's crazy. Hey, you guys know what to do, man. Give the video a thumbs up. Post in the comments down below, and of course smash that big red button. And shout out to all the new subscribers, man. I see every single one of you guys, and thank you so much for getting this channel to 3,500 subscribers. Man, that's crazy. I cannot. You guys can't even fathom how I feel. All right, and I love you guys so much for that. All right, cut all chit chat, man. Until next time, put your muscles up. It's your boy Flex. I'm out of here.